Hello and welcome. I believe my mic is working. Yes, it is. Welcome. It is just shy of 11 a.m. here on the East Coast. I'm Type Joy 101 here for 2KU March Madness, joined by Danny V once again. And we've got some good matchups for you today. Where we left off last time, we're going to pick up right away. Let me get this in frame. Get you on screen here. This is our regional in Washington D.C. We have two good matchups here: Kansas and Butler. Butler, Missouri Valley Conference champions. Kansas, the #1 overall seed, and the Big 12 champs. They had relatively easy times with their opponents. KU crushing Johns Hopkins. Butler taking care of VCU. Meanwhile, Purdue, reigning national champs, they take on Campbell, who had a 60-50 upset over 5-seed Cincinnati, looking to make the team's first ever Sweet 16 after nabbing the team's first ever conference win. And we'll start with that matchup in blue. KU and Butler. And immediately we have an upset scare, but they stay out of it. Kansas, 79-78, is going to the Sweet 16. Now we have Purdue. They take on Campbell. Oh, misclick there. And how about the Camels? 78-69. Purdue, reigning national champs, are going home in the second round. Campbell is going to the Sweet 16. The Fighting Camels. Let's go to Philadelphia now. Duke was upset by the 11 seed Indiana State. Meanwhile, LSU just barely escaped Bryant. Memphis won a nail-biter against UNC Greensboro. St. Mary's crushed Manhattan. So let's get started with that LSU and Indiana State matchup. No contest here. 89-64, LSU is going to the Sweet 16. A big year for the Tigers. They'll await the winner of St. Mary's and Memphis. And another big win for St. Mary's, 79-68. St. Mary's going back to the Sweet 16. So your East Region Sweet 16 matchups are set. Kansas and Campbell, St. Mary's, and LSU. Your thoughts, Danny? All right. To the East. Indiana crushed actually didn't crush Alcorn State. It was only a 10-point game, but they did escape the 16-1 upset. They'll take on Texas, who beat Washington 61-57. Meanwhile, Utah gets another 12 seed in Akron, who upset Auburn. And in overtime, a 1 seed has fallen, our first of the tournament, 86-84. Texas is moving on to the Sweet 16. They get the winner of Utah and Akron. (86-65). Utah is moving on. So there's another Sweet 16 matchup for you. Utah and Texas. From Anaheim to Phoenix. BYU has IPFW on their plate. IPFW, now known as Purdue Fort Wayne. It is not a particularly close one. 94-61. BYU has a ticket punch to the Sweet 16. How about San Diego State? The Aztecs get Texas A&M. The Aggies, a 10 seed, trying to make an underdog run of their own. It stops here. 79-63. San Diego State is moving on to the Sweet 16. And that sets your West bracket. Utah and Texas, San Diego State and BYU. Thoughts, Denny? Relatively chalk so far. We'll go back to the Final Four stuff when we finish the full bracket. Let's move now to the East, though. Let's move from the East to the Midwest. Last we saw the Midwest bracket, Kentucky beat Cal Baptist convincingly. Iowa State beat down Syracuse. Northern Colorado had an upset win over Notre Dame, and Wake Forest escaped UC Davis. Let's start with that Kentucky-Iowa State matchup. And we have another upset on our hands at the hands of the Big 12, 77-70. Iowa State knocks out our second number 1 seed. Northern Colorado and Wake Forest, and in a scare just barely. 76-75, Wake Forest is now in the Sweet 16. So there's your matchup, Wake Forest and Iowa State. To the other side of the bracket, in St. Louis, or from St. Louis to Denver we go. George Washington upset Michigan to make it to the Sweet 16 here. Gonzaga crushed North Alabama. St. Joe's had a close win over UCLA. And Creighton just escaped High Point to make it here. There we go. Let's start with that Gonzaga and George Washington matchup. The buck stops here for the George Washington Colonials. 90-71 the final score. Gonzaga is moving on. They get the winner of Creighton and St. Joe's. And we have another upset on our hands at the hands of the St. Joseph's Hawks. 75-61. St. Joe's is going balling for another week, or for another game. And there's your Midwest bracket. Gonzaga, St. Joe's, Wake Forest, Iowa State. Thoughts, Danny? Absolutely. All right, now we have our final regional for the men's bracket. We'll be doing the women's right after. Starting with Nashville, Connecticut, and Wichita State. UConn beat Harvard. Wichita State upset Arkansas to get here. Of course, Michigan State handling Louisiana Tech in a close game, but Valpo upsetting Clemson to make it here. And in a close game, the Missouri Valley is going home 66-65. UConn has a Sweet 16 berth lined up for it. Michigan State is up next. A blue blood against an all-time upset favorite in Valpo. And we have another overtime game on our hands. Michigan State surviving 86-80 to move into the Sweet 16. We have some double-digit C's on this back end of the South bracket in Tampa. UTEP and Western Kentucky already making this a very interesting bracket. But also San Francisco still in the game as they take on Houston. We've got another buzzer beater. 71-70 Western Kentucky is confirmed to be the lowest seed still in this bracket. They've got a Sweet 16 ticket punched. Houston and San Francisco. And we have an upset scare here. 72-71. Houston does survive. To the Sweet 16 they go. And there's your final bracket. UConn, Michigan State, Houston, and Western Kentucky. Thoughts, Danny? Well, that's your Sweet 16 set. Let's go bracket by bracket. Let's start at the East. Kansas, Campbell, St. Mary's, at LSU. Of those four, who's making the Final Four? All right. Let's get the other Sweet 16 bracket in here. The West. Utah, Texas, San Diego State, BYU. Who's going to the Final Four? All right. The other side. Let's start with that Midwest. Let's move on to the Midwest. Wake Forest, Iowa State, Gonzaga, St. Joe's. Who do you got? Mm-hmm. Also, how about St. Joseph's getting the win on International Joe Day? We mentioned that on the Type of Joey 101 stream just now. All right, one last bracket for the men's. UConn, Michigan State, Houston, Western Kentucky. Who's got that Final Four berth locked in? All right. What's next? Oh, sorry, no, I read that wrong. Now let's move on to the women's bracket. We had some major upsets go on here last time we were on. 2 16 seeds beat ones. But right now, this is not one of them. UConn and Gonzaga get us started, and we already have an upset. The UConn women are going home in the second round. Gonzaga has another Sweet 16 spot punched, as the men did. The women do as well, 82-75. To LSU and Cal, 74-69. LSU also moving to the Sweet 16. Next, Texas A&M and Mercer taking on Iowa, for the winner of Iowa and Richmond. And the legend grows in the women's bracket. Mercer It's another upset win, and they're going to the Sweet 16. Iowa and Richmond up next, 68-61. Iowa gets the win and a Sweet 16 berth against the Mercer Bears. How about the first of two major 16/1 seeds, Oklahoma City, as they get Pittsburgh. And as good as it lasted, the buck stops here for the Oklahoma City Stars. 77-66. Pittsburgh is moving on. They get the winner of NC State and UIC. 89-63. They'll take on North Carolina State. In an ACC Big East matchup, NC State and Pitt. Stanford and Pepperdine up next. And Stanford avoids an upset scare to get the win over the Pepperdine Waves. 64-63. Stanford is the winner of DePaul in Texas. And how about another upset win for the Texas Longhorns, as the men had one? So do the women. 73-65. They beat DePaul, and they will get Stanford. There's your Detroit Regional, NC State, Pittsburgh, Stanford, Texas. I did forget this regional, the West. Georgetown is the 16 seed of St. Mary's, who upset Notre Dame, as well as Georgia and Hawaii. $66-64. The 16 seeds are taken care of. Georgetown will move on. They'll get the winner of Georgia and Hawaii. We do have an upset, or an underdog run still going, that being the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors, who move on to the Sweet 16, 75-73. That's Georgetown, Hawaii. Duke gets an upset, gets an underdog in Colorado State, who's also moving on, 67-56. We still have Colorado State. Colorado State is still moving on, as will USC. What a dominant performance, 71-32 over Ohio State. And they will ride into Seattle against their future conference foe in Colorado State. The dominant win. Georgetown, Hawaii, USC, Colorado State. That wraps up that bracket. We also have Iowa, Mercer, LSU, Gonzaga in the East. Forgot to mention that. Now let's go to our last bracket in the South. South Carolina, Missouri State, Furman, Maine. Starting with that South Carolina, Missouri State matchup, 74-60. South Carolina still going strong. Furman and Maine, though. And leave it to Maine to keep it close. 65-64. They get the win over Furman. And Maine, the lowest seed in this tournament, is still moving on. Will they stay the lowest? Villanova and Marist still have to play. And they are not. How about Foxy? Shout him out. His Marist Red Foxes are moving on to the Sweet 16. Here on the women's bracket, Tennessee takes on Michigan State to send us home. 84-67, the final score. And Tennessee has a Sweet 16 ticket punched. So that's your So that's your women's bracket. Let's run through this real quick. LSU Gonzaga, Iowa Mercer. Who's going to the Final Four, Danny? No 14 seed has ever made the Final Four in the men's or women's bracket. So this would be a huge development if it happens. Meanwhile, we have two underdog runs going back to back in the West bracket. Georgetown, Hawaii, USC, Colorado State. Who do you have? NC State, Pittsburgh, Stanford, Texas. The closest to chalk we've had in this tournament. Who do you have? As I move down, the only one seed remaining is South Carolina. They get Maine, and Tennessee has Marist. Who do you have making the Final Four from these four? All right. We'll have some more tournaments exclusively on the 2KU Discord server, the Type Joy 101 Discord server, rather. Home to exclusive 2KU updates. But that'll do it for us here. Join us a few days from now. We'll have the Super Regionals, the Sweet 16, and Elite 8 ready for you. That's going to do it for us here. Thank you all so much for watching, and so long from the 2KU.